This is Chip Maxwell, and you're listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. Tune in as David breaks down some alarming global economic shifts, from Germany's deepest recession since reunification to a dramatic slowdown in global trade. He dives into why Europe is becoming nearly un-investable, how political leanings are impacting economic growth, and what it means when container ships from China and American freight volumes hit the brakes. David, you sent the team a chart, and it's a chart on German GDP, gross domestic product, year over year. Going back to the reunification of East and West Germany after the Cold War, you're saying this is the longest recession Germany's experienced since reunification?
Yeah, so Germany was the leader in Europe for
I think of Germany as this dynamo of European prosperity.
It was the financial engine of Europe for the last couple of decades, but they have just, their political bias towards socialistic versions of programs has just run them amok. And now they're in their seventh quarter of negative growth, and that is a long time, and especially with what's going on. And so Europe is almost becoming uninvestable. It really is. It's a great destination. A lot of people like to go over there and travel, and the dollar was stronger in the last couple of years, so it was actually relatively cheap to visit Europe. If you weren't aware, dollar's gotten a little weaker, so a little more expensive this year. But Germany, if Germany's not growing, the EU is not growing. I need to be clear, right? Because France is the second biggest economy over there behind Germany, and France is 73% of their GDP comes from the government. You can't grow. That's impossible. And government doesn't create growth. It takes from every dollar of the government. And again, we just need to have basic economics lesson. Every dollar a government takes from its citizenry to provide services, right, is a dollar they've taken that you can't spend, right? And
it's out of circulation.
They create government jobs. Who's paying for those jobs? The tax base, right? Yeah. Again, so this is a sign to tell you that they are not in very strong negotiating standpoint when it comes to the tariffs, et cetera, and they're putting all this rhetoric out, et cetera. But listen, their economy, the numbers don't lie. And on top of this, I didn't put it in the article, but as of this recording, right, we just had Canada run farther to the left, where they had a socialist candidate win who's even further left than Trudeau was, right? So now the new prime minister of Canada is going to be pushing more socialist problems, which is going to benefit the U.S. The further these countries run to socialism, the more our capitalistic nature here in a democracy is going to look like a beacon of sunshine, regardless of what you see in the near term. Because at least here, hard work is going to be, at least it should be, rewarded, right? So anyway, not a really good sign there for what we see there. The globe is slowing down drastically.
Well, David, speaking of leverage when it comes to trade negotiations, you also shared with the team a couple interesting charts here. Number of container ships sailing from China to the U.S., the vessel count plummeting, and then outbound tender volume. I think that means trucks leaving the L.A. area, taking products out to the USA. Some serious decreases in both of these indicators. I mean, your message to the team was you may want to stock up on essentials if you haven't already.
Yeah, so what happened here is you see on both these charts, if you are watching on YouTube, you can see an increase, right? A short-term increase that was preparing for said tariffs. So people were purchasing more goods and services, ordering more supplies. Well, the last of those ships is already basically hit the port here in the U.S. So from China, port of L.A., massive ports there to inbound a lot of goods, and so the disbursement is happening, and so now the trucks leaving L.A. are going down. The ships that are leaving China to put more goods in our ports are going down, and so you're going to see a lot less product hit shelves, and this is going to create some havoc. However, demand was dropping prior to this, so it's not just the tariffs. Consumer demand is reaching a peak anyway because the consumer is tapped out. This free money that came out from the last 5 to 6 years all ran out last year. We talked about it, and the consumer is having to borrow to keep up. And unfortunately, that's not good. The average American is living on credit cards, et cetera, and they're finally getting tapped out. And so this is twofold. The tariffs are going to have less goods come in, and the consumer is saying no thank you, and that's going to lead to some deflationary pressures, not inflationary pressures on some goods or services.
Well, and reduction in American demand, that has a ripple effect all the way across the Pacific to China, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in these
Again, the
charts.
media is not giving quite the full story when it comes to how these tariffs are going to play out. We have the bargaining chip because we are the consumer of the world. 36.2% of all consumption of all goods on the globe come from America. Chip, we're just 4% of the population of the world. 4% of the population, yet we consume well over a third of all goods and services. So these countries that want to import goods need us way more than we need them. And China is in an extremely bad situation financially, and it's not getting any better.
Well, right before we sat down to record the show, you told me that Apple is moving all of its China operations to India. Is that
Yeah,
right?
They announced all not 100% of their, but all their operations for the phones that are targeted to come to the U.S. For the products they want to manufacture afar and import to the U.S. They're going to try to move that to India because India is looking like, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, signing a trade deal with the U.S. So it'll be much lower on the expense or the cost of tariffs or pass-through expenses, whatever you want to call them, for those products to make their ways onto U.S. shores. And so they're just protecting their own. And again, is it fair? Is it not fair? People need to understand China does not play fair. When Chinese companies can come over here, create an LLC, buy a factory, build it here, no U.S. government involvement, nobody here has to be a shareholder. You cannot do the same in China. They must be a 51% venture partner in your company in China. So, and again, we won't have time to get into this today, Chip, but maybe it's a whole nother show or segment. China was allowed to join the World Trade Organization a couple of decades ago, right? They didn't come in as a developed country. They came in under the guidance of what we call a developing country. So they get special rules. They are allowed to charge tariffs, unlimited tariffs, to help benefit a developing country. They are not a developing country. They are a fully developed economy. They have more, they have 1.4 billion people, and this is nonsense. So that's why the World Trade Organization, Trump is pushing back. Sorry, you guys, we have to be at least be on a fair trading stance, a fair playing field, and we're not. And again, the nonsense of the political and the media to not recognize all pieces of the argument is ridiculous, not telling the American consumer the truth.
Let's shift gears and bring it back home, David. Last week, we had an extensive discussion about the real estate market, the housing market, rental and home purchases. And now you shared a follow-up item this week with the team, number of unsold homes for sale. So a few years ago, it was the price of homes that was skyrocketing. Now, apparently, it's the inventory of unsold homes that's skyrocketing.
Yeah, and again, what happens is when you have oversupply, demand drops. And so the seller has to be willing to drop its price to get the property moved, and that is not what's happening yet. So the inventory is going to continue to increase, and finally, if you have to sell, you're going to have to cut your price, and we're already seeing that shift. It is becoming a buyer's market, not a seller's market. We've been in a seller's market for a long, long time now. Now we're shifting into a buyer's market, and again, you have leverage if you're the buyer, and the average person is having to discount the price of their home listing price by about 5.6% right now to get it moved. And the days of listing your house at 5 p.m. and having multiple offers at 8 p.m. are long gone. In fact, now we see people listing the home, taking it back off the market, listing it again at a 10% discounted price, taking it back off the market over and over again, and it's not going to get better in the near term. So housing market is going to go through a major correction, especially in markets where it got hyperinflated the last few years.
So if you thought you wanted to sell, you just have to wait? You have to wait for another year or two?
Everybody's situation is different, right? So you may, like I said, I sold a bunch of properties we talked about on the air last year knowing this was coming. Still own several pieces of real estate, and I don't need to sell them. But, there's going to be opportunity to buy real estate cheaper, at least in my humble opinion, in the near future, next year.
Final item for this week, David. Another chart you shared with the team. Over 11% of credit card holders are making only the minimum payment. Apparently, that's the highest such number in history. That's a fool's game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, we saw this number climb and climb. It made a record high right when COVID hit. And that kind of makes sense. People were nervous, and they just made the minimum payment trying to figure things out. Once the stimulus checks rolled out, credit card payments got paid. In fact, they actually got paid off, and consumers had savings. And again, but those dollars that we just talked about have run out. And now we've seen this number climb and climb and climb, and now it's in an all-time high. Again, the consumer, regardless of tariffs, has already been tapped. They're tapped out. They can't afford the houses they're in. This is the debt tsunami coming due. The bill is now finally is now coming due in America, and this current administration, I believe, is trying to do something about that. But because we don't have a unified stance to, yes, we should patriotic thing, get this debt under control, but how's this end? Well, probably a recession, as we've been calling for, because you're not going to be able to institute austerity here like they did in Europe. If you remember Grexit from a few years ago, right? And they were losing their minds because they were telling the Italians they're going to have to work over 30 hours a week. What? Right? Or excuse me, Greece, not Italians, but so the
GR in Grexit.
Yeah. So, but now Greece is a fully functioning economy. They're the hardest working people in the EU because they went through the pain and realized, you know what, if we produce, we can actually afford the things that we want our government to provide for us. We have to go through that day of reckoning here, and that's going to be some measure of austerity, which means we have to deal with the entitlements, et cetera. It doesn't mean we're going to cut anybody's benefits, but we have to talk about who gets the benefits, and that's what we see with DOGE right now. A lot going on, a lot to contemplate. If you don't have a plan to weather the storm, we might be able to help you out with our report card. I'll leave it at that.
Perfectly. Thank you for listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. If you want to learn how to generate lifetime income, reduce your tax bill, and maintain your lifestyle in retirement, visit retiresmartpodcast.com. And make sure to subscribe to keep up with new episodes every week.